Hey, this is Foucault making the second video in my Flop Fundamentals series for Poker Savvy Plus. I'm going to recommend, if you haven't already seen the first video in this series, that you watch that before watching this video. I'm going to sometimes assume some of the information that was put out in that video. In particular, this video is going to be about how to play when you have called a raise from someone else in position. The previous video was about how to evaluate flop texture and how to decide when you're the preflop raiser whether the board is a good board for you to bet at if you didn't flop a hand, if you did flop a hand. In this video, I'm going to assume that you already have that information, and so I may say things like, this is a good time for him to continuation bet, and so we can continue with a wider range of hands than we otherwise would. I'm not necessarily going to explain why this is a good board for him to continuation bet. That'll be based on information that was presented in my first video, so I would recommend that you watch that before watching this video. So for this video, as I mentioned, we're going to be talking about very common preflop and flop situations that will come up when you're playing 6-max no-limit hold'em, especially in mid-stakes games, although it probably could apply smaller and higher as well. We're going to be looking at situations where there's been one raise and you have called the raise and you have position. The third video in this series will look at the more tricky situation where you're at a position, but for today's video we're going to talk about hands where you've called a raise in position and are deciding how to play whatever hand you've flopped against an opponent who has either bet or checked. So we'll be talking about how to evaluate flops when you are not the preflop aggressor. And you should realize that you've already put yourself at a little bit of a disadvantage by not being the preflop aggressor. As a lot of you probably know, the ability to represent a big hand on the flop is an advantage that the preflop aggressor has. The person who raises preflop has shown more strength in the hand than the person who calls a raise preflop. In all likelihood, the strongest starting hands in hold'em, like a pair of aces or a pair of kings, are more likely to be in the preflop raiser's range than in the preflop caller's range, which means that the preflop raiser, all other things being equal, is more likely to have a strong hand on the flop than the preflop caller is, and so can get away with representing a hand on certain flops even when he doesn't have one. I've seen it written, and I've heard some people say that it's actually an advantage for the caller to know that an opponent is going to be betting at most flops.